They say giants don't feel the cold, that their bones are too thick, their hearts too stone-set to notice the wind clawing at skin, or the silence echoing through empty cabins. But Silas Cade, 30 winters old and tall as the barn he never finished, had learned to feel cold in places no fire could touch. He lived at the edge of Widow's Bluff, where the horizon folded like a broken promise. His cabin was built from heavy pine and quiet grief, its planks nailed with hands that once held a brother's fevered body and let it go. The porch sagged from storms he never patched, and the windows watched the world like eyes that had seen too much and hoped for nothing more. Most nights, Silas lit no lantern. He sat in the dark with a cup that steamed and went cold in his grip, boots unlaced, jaw locked like a man guarding his own rusting soul. He did not speak, not to birds, not to deer, not even to the Lord anymore. People in dry Juniper Hollow said he'd gone mute from guilt. But the truth was simpler. He had nothing left worth saying. So when a knock came at the door just before twilight, he mistook it for wind. When it came again, softer, trembling, he rose slow, like a bear roused from a long winter's sleep. What he found on the other side wasn't a storm, nor a debt come due, but a girl. She couldn't have been more than 23, her braids loose and wind-whipped, a faded blue shawl clutched around narrow shoulders. Dust streaked her cheeks. Her feet were bare. She started, then swallowed, her voice no louder than the breath behind it. Just till morning. Please. Silas stared, backlit by the fire's low glow. The girl's eyes flicked past him to the warm crackle beyond, her body trembling in the shadow of his height. And still, he said nothing. Not yet. She flinched, half turning. He stepped aside. She walked in like someone used to being turned away. He offered no words, no welcome. Just a stool beside the hearth and a threadbare quilt folded at its foot. She wrapped herself tight and sat cross-legged, staring into flame. Her face held stories she didn't tell. Her silence said she'd learned not to waste breath on explanations no one wanted. Silas moved about the room, slow and deliberate, like a man afraid sudden motion might shatter something fragile. He poured hot water into a chipped cup, dropped in a pinch of sage and mint, and placed it near her hands. She blinked at the gesture, then nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. He inclined his head, then sank into his chair across the room. Wood popped in the fire. The wind gnawed at the corners of the cabin. She sipped the tea. Her hands shook. Later, when the flames softened into coals and her shoulders sagged with sleep, she curled on the floor beneath the quilt and let the hush hold her. Silas did not sleep. He watched the fire and, for the first time in years, did not feel alone. At dawn, she was still there. She stayed quiet. So did he. She swept the floor with a bundle of willow branches and boiled wild roots into broth that tasted like rain-soaked earth. Her name, he learned 2 days later, was Tayan. It meant new moon. Fitting, he thought, for someone who'd slipped into his life without light but shifted every tide within it. On the third morning, she placed a feather on the table. Black and white. Sharp-edged and ceremonial. He didn't ask what it meant. He only nodded. She understood. By the end of the week, the townsfolk noticed. Dry Juniper Hollow was a place that traded in wheat, salt, and talk. Reverend Amos Grady saw Tayan buying flour at Maggie Lou Crane's store and took it upon himself to speak with Silas that Sunday. "She's a stranger," Grady said, voice thick with righteousness. "And worse. You know what folks'll say. What they're already saying." Silas didn't respond. His eyes stayed fixed on the cross above the pulpit, as if it held answers the Reverend never would. That night, Tayan sat beside him on the porch, the stars blinking low and tired. She held a tin cup between her palms and said, "I can leave." He looked at her, really looked. Her eyes didn't plead. They simply braced for the leaving. He stood, walked back inside, and came out holding a folded blanket, his mother's, soft with age and patched with memory. He draped it over her shoulders and returned to his chair. A small gesture. But the earth shifted. The sheriff came next. Sheriff Doyle rode up mid-morning, his horse clopping with the rhythm of authority. He tipped his hat, more out of habit than respect. "Morning, Cade," he said. "Heard you got company." Silas stood on the porch, arms crossed. Tayan was inside, boiling juniper. "She's not causing trouble," the sheriff said, glancing toward the window. "But you know how things are. Folks get nervous. Might be better she moved on." Silas said nothing. "Just think on it," Doyle muttered, tapping his reins. As the sheriff rode off, Tayan appeared beside him. "You want me gone?" she asked. He shook his head, slow. In that silence, she smiled, for the first time. Days passed in a rhythm too quiet to name. She taught him how to plant ghost peppers in shallow clay, how to dry herbs by hanging them near the chimney. He fixed the porch stairs. She mended his shirts. They didn't touch, didn't confess. But every shared glance stitched something torn. One evening, she hummed a melody that curled like smoke in the room. Low and ancient. It unraveled something in him. He turned to her, voice rough from rust. "What's that song?" "My mother's," she said. "She sang it when she carried my brother across the plains. He didn't make it." Silas sat down, hands curled into fists. "I had a brother," he said. "Elias. Fever took him when I went into town for whiskey." Tayan looked at him, eyes unreadable. He didn't speak again that night. He didn't need to. The next day, he carved a marker for Elias behind the cabin, next to the yarrow where birds nested. Tayan placed the feather at its base. The days grew longer. The garden grew fuller. She taught him how to watch the sky and read the wind. He taught her how to whittle flutes from cedar and shape snares for rabbit. She sang. He listened. But peace never lasts long when people fear what they don't understand. They came at dusk. 12 men. Doyle at the front. Grady behind him. Faces set like stone, eyes sharp with the hunger for control. "Step aside, Cade," Doyle said, hand on his belt. "We're taking her." Silas stood in the doorway, unmoving. "She's a thief. A drifter. You know the stories." "She's mine," Silas said. The words came like thunder cracking a drought sky. Tayan stepped out behind him, shoulders back. "I'm not yours," she said softly. Silas turned slightly. "No. But you're not theirs either." Something in the air stilled. Grady raised a hand. "You'd throw away your name for her?" Silas looked over the men, his gaze heavy as falling snow. "I already did," he said. "When I let my brother die." The crowd stirred. "She stays," Silas said, voice flat and firm. "And if you come again, come ready." The men hesitated. Then, one by one, they turned. Dust lifted in their wake. Silence returned. Later that night, Tayan danced. Barefoot in the yard, arms open to the wind. Her shawl caught the moonlight like water. Silas watched from the porch, his chest tight, his hands loose at his sides. She danced not to entertain, but to exist, to reclaim space in a world that had tried to erase her. Silas didn't move, didn't speak, but when she turned to look at him, he nodded once. And for the first time since the fire had gone cold, he smiled. They didn't fall in love the way stories are told. No declarations, no kisses under stars. But in the days that followed, she left tea near his boots before dawn. He carved her name into a cedar flute. She placed wildflowers beside Elias's stone. He asked what her mother's voice sounded like. Little gestures, small mercies. They were building something, not out of need, but choice. And the wind, that old bearer of whispers, learned their names and carried them gently through the valley. I tell you this not because it's rare, but because it's true. Because kindness survives in places long abandoned. Because even giants carry shame, and even wanderers deserve rest. And because sometimes the new moon rises when the heart is finally ready to begin again.